Great. Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Can everyone hear me okay? Coming in loud and clear? Okay, great. Well, good morning to those of you joining us from the West Coast, and good afternoon to everyone else. My name is Audrey Mossberger, and I'm Director of Events at the National Bureau of Asian Research. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's expert discussion on Taiwan's post-COVID-19 economic trajectory and the future of U.S. economic relations. U.S. Taiwan economic relations. Before turning it over to NBR President Roy Camphausen, I'd like to offer a few quick tips to optimize your experience. First, to change your screen view, you can navigate to the upper right-hand corner of your screen and toggle between the various options. We recommend grid view or active speaker view for this discussion, as each panelist will be pinned during their respective remarks. Probably noticed your microphone is muted for this event. However, we encourage you to get involved when we open it up to audience Q&A following remarks by our expert panel. Please type your questions into the web chat box, the icon for which can be found in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and resembles a small speech bubble. Clicking on the icon will open up the chat box on the right side of your screen. Simply select everyone from the drop-down box, type your question, and hit enter. Our moderator will do his best to present all questions to the panel within our allotted time. For those joining us via live stream, welcome, and we encourage you to email any questions to events@nbr.org. We look forward to what promises to be an engaging discussion with our expert panel, and with that, I will turn it over to Roy. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey, and welcome everyone. I'm Roy Camphausen, President of NBR. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion of Taiwan's post-COVID-19 economic trajectory and the future of U.S. Taiwan economic relations. Amid a global battle to contain the spread of COVID-19, Taiwan recently marked its 200th consecutive day without a single domestically transferred COVID case. Just amazing. Taiwan's effective policy response and the enthusiastic partnership of the people of Taiwan in that effort have been simply remarkable. We salute our friends in Taiwan for their great achievements in this regard. Thanks to this effective response, Taiwan's GDP grew 3.3% last quarter, largely driven by exports from its high-tech manufacturing sector. And now, President Tsai has indicated her willingness to pursue a U.S. Taiwan bilateral trade agreement. In August, she lifted ractopamine restrictions on U.S. beef and pork imports, a longtime barrier to U.S. trade negotiations, as a first step. And a step that she told our NBR delegation to Taiwan a couple of years ago was an inherently difficult political decision. Something about winning re-election by a landslide, controlling the LY, and mastering COVID that have generated a lot of political capital for her. During the pandemic, trade ties between Taiwan and the United States have remained strong, and Taiwan is now America's 9th largest trading partner, up 1 spot from last year. In today's session, we will explore the implications of such a bilateral trade agreement within a larger discussion of the economic drivers in Taiwan and the future of U.S.-Taiwan relations. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. It's now my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Director General Daniel Guoqing Chun. Director General Chun has recently returned to Taipei Economic and Cultural Office, Seattle, as Director General. From 2003 to 2009, he served in Seattle as Senior Consular Officer. And so we at NBR are very happy to see him back in Seattle. Prior to returning to TECO Seattle, Director General Chun served as Deputy Secretary General of the Taiwan Council for U.S. Affairs. He has also previously served as Deputy Director of the Political Division at TECRO here in Washington, D.C., and as Section Chief in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Department of North American Affairs. Suffice it to say, he brings a wealth of experience and knowledge of U.S.-Taiwan relations from his previous positions. Before beginning his career with MOFA, he served as a second lieutenant in the Republic of China Army. He earned a BA in diplomacy from National Zhengzhou University and a master's degree from Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. We're very grateful to have Director General Chun here to share his insights on U.S.-Taiwan economic relations and Taiwan's economic situation in the wake of COVID-19. If I may add a personal note, it's been my privilege to know Daniel for many years. It's a delight to congratulate him on his selection as Director General of TICO Seattle. As many know, NBR's founding headquarters and our roots are in Seattle, and so we're very glad to be able to partner with TICO and now Daniel in his new role as Director General there. At this point, Daniel, I'd like to turn the floor over to you for your remarks, and welcome.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for your kind words. It's really a pleasure, coming back to Seattle. So thank you. So to begin, good afternoon. I'm Daniel Gochin Chen, the Director General of TICO Seattle. I'm so glad to see so many friends. So first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to talk about Taiwan post-COVID-19 economic trajectory and the future of the U.S. Taiwan economic relation. So this is a very much a topic of interest for many countries to ponder as we are waiting for the vaccine. To start with, I'd like to brief you about the facts of Taiwan-U.S. economic partnership. Taiwan is currently, just like Roy just mentioned, Taiwan is currently the 9th largest trading partner of the United States. It's an astonishing accomplishment considering our population is only 7.1% of the U.S. population, and the size is only 1/6 of the Washington state. So Taiwan is the 7th largest destination for U.S. agricultural products, and the second, if you do that on a per capita basis, just behind Canada. So Taiwanese companies are investing significantly across the United States in sectors from technology, steel, and petrochemicals. So the latest major investment from Taiwan is the $12 billion plan of the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC. They're going to bring the cutting-edge semiconductor manufacturing to Arizona State. So on the other hand, the U.S. is Taiwan's second largest trading partners and an important source of high-tech investment. Just about 3 weeks ago, Microsoft announced its largest ever investment in Taiwan, which will create a new economic ecosystem for 5th-generation communication for AI and other emerging technologies. It's going to create about over 30,000 jobs with an investment of over $10 billion until 2024. So this follows the recent investment by Google, Cisco, and many other high-tech firms. So Taiwan companies supply top U.S. firms, including Apple, Dell, Qualcomm, with advanced technology, intermediate goods. Taiwan and the U.S. company are also strategic and complementary partners in many areas, which enable business model and the global excellence of the American advanced technology enterprises. So the importance of Taiwan's economy to the U.S. and vice versa cannot be overemphasized. Bearing those in mind, recently, Taiwan government decided to lift long-standing market restriction on U.S. pork and beef, which demonstrates Taiwan's determination to a fulfilling commitment and move forward. In 3 days, in Taiwan and the United States going to launch the first Taiwan-U.S. Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue to strengthen mutual economic ties across spectrum of priority issues and forge new areas of economic cooperation. So the impact of COVID-19 and the recent developments has created further momentum for Taiwan's long-term objective, that is bilateral trade agreement with the United States. This BTA holds significance for Taiwan's economic prosperity, political autonomy, and national security. We also believe it is in line with the U.S. interest, given the U.S. perspectives on security in the Indo-Pacific region and its desire to protect technology supply chains, as well as to attract new investment into the states. Since I'm not the expert for the trade and economics, so I'm going to brief you about on top of the 3 economic benefits, I'd like to brief you about the 3 major benefits of the Taiwan-U.S. BTA. The first one is to protect the integrity of technology supply chain. So given the current geostrategic framework, there has been much attention paid to supply chain security. Supply of critical technologies among trusted partners is one of the key components of economic recovery in the post-pandemic. and it should not be controlled or stolen by countries that do not share responsibility and partnership. Taiwan is one of the world's largest producer of microchips and other important electronics. A BTA will definitely provide the market incentives for the company to build stronger supply chain linkage directly with the states in area ranging from ICT and medical devices. The second benefit is to setting a model for other trading partners. So as advanced economies, Taiwan and the US would be able to draft an agreement that fully secure our interest in protecting workers' rights, the environment protection, the intellectual property protection, and also other priorities. The US would be able to use such an agreement as a framework for other trade partners' discussion to be based on fairness and reciprocity. For Taiwan, a trade agreement with the US would help encourage other trading partners to overcome geostrategic considerations and engage in similar discussions with Taiwan. The third benefit is to strengthen Taiwan's economic and political autonomy, as well as the peace and stabilities of the Indo-Pacific region. Over the past years, Taiwan's high degree of reliance on China market has highlighted the danger of being over-leveraged in any one single market, particularly given the unique security threat Taiwan faces. So the pandemic has also prompted many international companies to once again look at the other market opportunity. And we believe that this trade agreement would further encourage greater market diversification and potential investments back into our own markets. In addition, a high standard Taiwan-US BTA will provide a model for Southeast Asia country to develop their own high-tech economy and a roadmap for the US to deepen economic relations with the Southeast Asia. Last but not least, as regard to the future of the US-Taiwan economic relations, what I'd like to say is that as a fellow democracy and a reliable partner, Taiwan is always ready to work with the states, and we look forward to making progress on those issues we have discussed. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Director General Chen. My name is Michael Wills. I'm Executive Vice President here in NBR's Seattle office. I have the privilege of now asking a handful of follow-up questions to Director General Chen before we open up for the rest of our speakers and our panel discussion this morning. So thank you for your remarks, Daniel. You mentioned the BTA between the negotiations between the US and Taiwan is potentially providing a model for Taiwan to pursue its independence and develop relationships with other trading partners. Could you tell us a little bit more about who are some of the economies that Taiwan is interested in expanding these sorts of free trade arrangements with, if the US goes successfully?
You mean what else the other country would like to?
I'm curious specifically which countries you think are Taiwan's next partners, or the ones that it's hoping to develop closer ties with.
I think the very first target, ever since I served in the ministry, I realized that the US is always our #1 target. And for other countries, we like to, of course, if you're speaking about the trade volume, I think the European country might be the next target. Also, since the government has a southbound policy, and also we like to discuss this free trade agreement with the, especially like Thailand or Indonesia, many other Southeast Asia countries. That's our target.
And then just a quick follow-up: any priorities placed on trade relationships with Japan or with South Korea?
Yes, I heard about discussion about Taiwan and Japan. Our Ministry of Economic Affairs, they are doing pretty well. And you know that we even try really hard to join the CPTPP. So definitely Japan is our source. But so far, I think if we can have this deal with the states, and hopefully it is going to have a spillover effect to other countries, they are more willing to discuss with Taiwan as regard to the possible opposition from China.
Thank you. So Deputy Minister C.C. Chen is arriving in Washington in a day or so, and will begin talks with Undersecretary of State Keith Kroc at the end of the week. I know Secretary Kroc made his first trip to Taiwan as a serving cabinet official earlier this summer. What are you expecting to see emerge from the talks between the two sides over the course of the next few days?
Yeah, good question. So I think this is the first ever this kind of dialogue. We call it Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue. So which is going to happen in 3 days. So I may not be able. It may not be appropriate for me to talk too much about this dialogue since it has not been held right now. But I can tell you about the topics we're going to cover. We're going to talk about the issues about global health security. And cooperation with the supply chain, clean 5G networks, science and technology cooperation, also the infrastructure development and energy security, and the investment examination. So I think this also demonstrated right after our restriction, left with operation of the beef and pork, it also demonstrated our determination to move forward. So I can assure you that we really hope to continue deepening economic relations with the states.
Thank you. I mean, the issues around the high technology supply chains and improving the security of those are something we very much focused on here at NBR. Lotta, I think, actually was in our Seattle office a year or so ago for an event looking at Taiwan's role in that network. I want to go back a little bit, though, to this question of agriculture. As Roy mentioned in his opening remarks, President Tsai took a bit of a political risk to open up Taiwan to imports of beef and pork from the United States. As you look out over the next few years, do you feel like she has enough ability to manage the domestic politics of that decision? So assuming that the BTA negotiations go well, assuming the trade relationship between Taiwan and the United States starts to improve and to strengthen, how much of a risk has President Tsai taken here with the domestic politics?
Wow. So to be honest with you, I'm really confident that President Tsai has definitely the political capital to solve this issue. This issue has been there for since I served in the ministry. Since 2009, we signed a protocol between the U.S. as regard to the issues of beef and recently the pork. This has been lingered for many, many years. So I think after the pandemic, I think many countries, they really want to boost their economy. So BTA is one of our solutions we figured out. And I have a very confidence that President Tsai will square out all the difficulty and boost the economy with the trade relations between Taiwan and the United States.
Thank you. So you mentioned sort of global health and pursuing health security as one of the objectives for the talks, the Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue that's beginning this week. Taiwan has been a great success story in terms of its ability to manage the COVID-19 pandemic and maintain a remarkably high level of economic growth. What lessons do you think that Taiwan has to offer both advanced economies and some of the developing economies that are the objects of the new southbound policy in terms of balancing managing the public health crisis and yet maintaining some level of economic openness?
What I think about right now there are two lessons we have learned, and probably these are the two examples I think Taiwan could share with our neighbors and our friends. The first one is about the successful pandemic management. This pandemic management. So nobody would deny that the vaccine is the key to restore our normal life and put the economy back to the original track. But before that, Taiwan models proved to be effective in controlling of the pandemic. We have done many demonstration or kind of introduction about the Taiwan model. So it also shows that Taiwan can help and is helping the world in fighting pandemic. So everyone is welcome to check our website and many articles as regard to the discussion of the Taiwan model. So the first one I'm thinking about is the successful pandemic management. Second one I can think about is the flexibility and resilience of the Taiwan small and medium enterprises, which enhance Taiwan's strength as a leader in global supply chain. So let me give you one example. So before the pandemic, the daily production of the surgical masks is around like 2 million masks a day. But this number jumps to 10 times to 20 million per day. So to do this, you have to have a shift integration of industry. So Taiwan manufacturing capacity could meet many kinds of demands for electronics that is what in need in or after the pandemic. So we welcome that our neighbors or country, like-minded country, to work with us as regard to the cooperation of a supply chain. I think that's the two examples I can think about.
Thank you. And on the first point there, we were delighted to host Digital Minister Audrey Tang earlier this summer for a virtual discussion on Taiwan's sort of biosurveillance response to the pandemic. That event was recorded. It's available on the NBR website, and I'd encourage anyone who's interested to dig a little bit deeper into that, to hear from Minister Tang herself about how Taiwan has balanced tracking the spread of the pandemic and yet maintaining privacy and confidentiality and the other important elements of surveilling a disease in a free and an open society that maintains people's individual rights. Daniel, I'm going to ask you one final question before we move to our expert panel discussion here. The elephant in the room, of course, I think is how does Beijing respond to all of these moves? So, we know that Taiwan under President Tsai has had a strong sort of new southbound policy. We're looking forward to the progress in the trade negotiations beginning this week. And Taiwan is clearly playing a much more important role and a growing role in terms of the high-tech supply chain and the health and PPE supply chain. How is Beijing responding to this, and how concerned are you and your colleagues in the government about steps that China might take as Taiwan begins to kind of grow its international space here?
Good question. So I think the short answer is that they will do whatever they could to prevent Taiwan from engaging in trade agreements, such kind of agreement with other international partners. So they are always trying to diminish our economy autonomy and try to keep Taiwan dependent on their market. So definitely they will not be happy. But you have to think about there's a BTA or kind of free trade agreement deal of Taiwan with our diplomatic allies or Singapore or New Zealand. Those agreements, they are totally compatible with the WTO standards, and it proves they are working. So we hope that the U.S. could show support to a free and open economy against the Chinese communist coercion and aggression. So and also how to prevent that. I mean, we've been used to countering those major taken by China. So I can guarantee you that we are ready.
Thank you. That's good to hear, and we should look forward to hearing more from the talks as public information becomes available. I hope you'll be able to remain on the call now for the rest of the session. And if you are, I might
I will
take the privilege of following back up and asking you a final question towards the end.
Sure.
But it's my pleasure now to introduce our three expert speakers, and I'll introduce them in the order in which we're going to ask them to speak. And they will then make some remarks. And following their remarks, we will have some time available for questions from the audience. So as Audrey mentioned at the beginning, we have a chat function in WebEx. Please type in your questions, send those to the moderators. They'll channel them to me, and I'll endeavor to get through as many as possible to our speakers during our time available today. And I'll apologize in advance if we run out of time and your question is not asked. But first up, I'm going to ask our first speaker, Ms. Lotte Danielson, to speak. She's the Vice President of the U.S. Taiwan Business Council, and she really runs the organization day to day. As a Vice President, I know what that means, so delighted to have you joining us here again. In addition to many of her responsibilities there, she also runs the annual U.S. Taiwan Defense Industry Conference, and so she will speak first. We'll then go to Dr. Shelley Rigger. Shelley is a professor of political science at Davidson College. We're delighted to have her joining us here today, an expert on Taiwan's domestic politics. And her most recent book is Why Taiwan Matters, Small Island Global Powerhouse. And so she will speak second. And then we'll go south down the west coast here to Dr. Vinny Agarwal, down at UC Berkeley. And he's also a professor of political science there and affiliated with the Haas School of Business. His most recent book is Responding to the Rise of China. And so we're going to move from sort of the small to the large through our three speakers this morning. Ask them each to speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions. So Lotte, over to you first.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this discussion today. It is a great time to be talking about Taiwan economics and trade. This week has really been bracketed by sort of a negative start to the week, and it's going to be a positive end to the week. So by negative past weekend, I meant that 15 countries led by China signed a trade agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RECPT, which excludes Taiwan. And it's going to probably have a negative effect on the Taiwan economy, including sectors like steel, textiles, petrochemicals and machine tool exports and so on, but not so much on tech. And 70% of Taiwan's trade with the RCEP countries is already tariff-free. So it's not a huge negative issue. And then, of course, as we've already heard, the positive ending to this week is going to be the Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue. For the first time, where the U.S. Department of State and the Ministry of Economic Affairs are going to have a wide-ranging discussion on so many different topics. As Daniel mentioned, technology and semiconductor supply chains, energy, telecom, investment, healthcare. So it's going to span the gamut of U.S. Taiwan economic relations. We are hoping that there will be some sort of MOU that will come out of this particular talks. Obviously, we don't know what that's going to look like quite yet, but we hope that there's some agreement to continue this dialogue moving forward. I want to talk a little bit about something that is specifically stated as excluded from the talks on Friday, and that, of course, is the potential for a bilateral trade deal between the U.S. and Taiwan. The reason it's excluded is because it's with the State Department Economic Office, not to do with USTR, and USTR basically keeps their paws in trade. Trade is their remit, and they're holding very tightly to that. So that's possible that there will be some talk about the BTA this Friday, but probably not so much. But it really shows the excellent bilateral relationship that the U.S. and Taiwan has and has had for a long time. We have seen some really good bipartisan support here in the United States, and we're seeing that based on things like arms sales and the official high-level visits that we've seen this year. But really, trade has been the exception to this issue. So the main mechanism for the U.S. and Taiwan to talk on trade issues has been the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, which is TIFA. And there has not been a TIFA talk since October of 2016. This progress on trade has been blocked on this issue of pork and ractopamine, that even though pork is such a small percentage of overall trade, it's really been the issue that's been holding progress up. And it's a really unfortunate delay. As we've heard already, Taiwan is a huge trading partner for the U.S. It's a big export market for agricultural products. Taiwan companies serve as suppliers for U.S. companies, and of course, Taiwan is an amazingly important cog in the global technology supply chain. And U.S. businesses, which is the constituency that sort of the council represents, are interested in looking at Taiwan, as we've heard, Microsoft and Google and Cisco and so on. And the trade confrontation between the U.S. and the U.S. and China has really shown that Taiwan is a good place to maybe move if you're looking at shifting your supply chain. And so we think it's important to move forward on the trade and trying to solve some of the additional trade issues in the relationship. And a BTA is definitely a potential way to do so. In DC, we've seen off and on sort of discussions on a bilateral trade deal for a long time. In December, I've been working on this, I think, since 2003 or so, an FTA or BTA with Taiwan. The first thing that came out was in December of 2004, when Nick Lardy and Dan Rosen put out a study to say, what would an FTA with Taiwan look like? And even though they saw some modest economic gains, the absolute gains from an FTA with Taiwan was actually larger than for most of the other FTAs that were being under consideration at that time. It would also improve regional economic integration, which is some of the things that Daniel spoke about. Now, we've seen this kind of issue come up again and again since then, in 2006, 2012, but 2019 to 2020 has really been peak support for a BTA. It's coming out of Congress. So the House wrote to USTR in 2019, and Senate wrote to USTR in 2020 to really encourage them to move forward on a BTA with Taiwan. And we're seeing that not just from Congress as a group, but also from individual members, from think tanks, from agricultural organizations, including those representing things like soybeans and corn. Just to toot our own horn, we actually started a BTA coalition, the U.S. Taiwan Business Council, in conjunction with the American Chamber of Commerce in Taipei. And we are hoping to continue to broaden that out to additional members, where we will hope to have a consolidation of support for a BTA. A BTA is a good idea, in our opinion. Taiwan, as mentioned, has already environmental protection laws, labor laws, IPR laws, and it would be a mutually beneficial economically for the two sides, in particular in agriculture, in energy, in finance, and in telecom, giving market access to U.S. companies into Taiwan and vice versa. And it would really bind Taiwan tighter to the U.S. supply chain, which is something that we would like to see. And as Daniel mentioned, as a template for more and open trade in the Indo-Pacific. Taiwan is already pursuing joining multilateral deals like the CPTPP. And again, we're looking to encourage other trade deals, and the BTA would encourage participation in other trade deals in the region and move Taiwan away from China, the China economic orbit, which is something that's probably in the interest of the United States. Now, as we've mentioned, in August of this year, President Tsai convincingly demonstrated that the Taiwan government is committed to the U.S.-Taiwan trade relations when they made those changes to the issues surrounding ractopamine that will take effect in January of this. It is a unilateral step by Taiwan to solve some outstanding issues. And that is despite, as we heard, substantial pushback domestically, including petitions and hearings and a potential referendum. But President Tsai has said that they will carry through with it. Taiwan will carry through with this. And it's a huge step forward. It shows tremendous leadership and taking some political risk. And as President Tsai mentioned again at the AMTM dinner today, which earlier today in Taipei, they are really focused on trying to sign a BTA. It's really unfortunate that USTR really hasn't offered any responses to it yet. They have basically said that they're too busy with other things. There is no bandwidth for them to do it, and they're working on the China trade deal. The council feels that there's really no reason that they can't do both at the same time. There's just apparently no political or bureaucratic will within the USTR to move forward on this. Add to that the uncertainty due to what's going to happen when we get a new administration in. Biden has said that he wants to wait to negotiate any new trade deals. So we'll really see what happens. But we don't see any reason that there couldn't be continued good relations between the U.S. and Taiwan on trade. Taiwan remains a steadfast partner for the United States. We might see some TIFA talks first, but I don't think that Taiwan should really settle for that. A BTA is sort of the gold standard, what Taiwan really needs from the United States. As we see with the RCEP, that highlights the need to strengthen trade ties with the United States. And changes made during a negotiation with the U.S. could prepare to join the other trade deals like the CPTPP and better position it again for FTAs with regional and global partners. On the other side, on the U.S. side, it a BTA negotiation would allow it to address other issues as well. So pharmaceuticals and medical device issues that they're seeing, digital trade, labeling, regulations, transparency. There's a lot of different things that they can address in the negotiations for a BTA. That includes non-tariff trade barriers and other issues. And so, we feel that it's really time to move ahead with it. We hope to see movement on the trade front in the next several months. And we hope to continue to work with other organizations, so with U.S. companies, to talk about how important the BTA is and how we can continue to move forward. And I will end there.
Great, thank you so much, Lotte. Let's go straight to Shelley and have her make her remarks now, and then to Ginny, and then we'll open up for questions. As a reminder, as our speakers are talking, please do fire your questions into the chat box, and we'll have a number lined up as soon as we begin our Q&A session. Shelley.
All right, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I wish I was really with you, but we all have to take what we can get right now. So, and thanks also for originating this event, which I think is really timely, and I've already learned quite a bit. And we're just barely in, 45 minutes in. So I wanted to talk a little bit. I was asked to talk a little bit today about domestic politics and in particular, the domestic political scene in Taiwan surrounding the COVID pandemic and the COVID response by the Tsai administration. So less about economics and more about kind of the political environment within Taiwan that is shaping the economic developments and Taiwan's economic progress at the moment. So the first thing I wanted to do is just to draw your attention to some significant changes in the basic attitudinal indicators that we follow in Taiwan. There have been for many decades polls that kind of measure some basic attitudes and preferences of Taiwanese. And they've been, there have been sort of long-term trends, but not a huge amount of abrupt change until the last 2 years. And in the last 2 years, we do see some significant new directions in this polling. And all of that is pretty much in the same direction. It is in a direction that is favorable to the DPP and to Tsai Ing-wen, Taiwan's current president, and her party, the DPP, or Democratic Progressive Party, and unfavorable to the preferences of the leadership in Beijing. So just to give you a few examples of what I'm talking about, Taiwanese are often asked, do you consider yourself Taiwanese, Chinese, or both? And for many years, the category both was the plurality choice for Taiwanese, suggesting that while they think of themselves as fundamentally of and from the island of Taiwan, they also recognized some component of Chinese culture or heritage in their identity. The choice Taiwanese only increased from 58% to 67% in 1 year's time, after years of bouncing around the 40% line. So there was an abrupt uptick in the percentage of Taiwanese identifying as Taiwanese only. Similarly, the percentage of Taiwanese who are willing to express a desire in the long run for independence has increased. So the percentage who would like to go for independence today is still very small, but the percentage that would like to look toward independence in the long run has increased significantly in the last year or two. The popularity of the DPP has exceeded the popularity of no party, right? No party affiliation, which is pretty unusual, although it's still only about 33%. So, it's not like the DPP has overwhelming popular support, but it is more strongly supported than it has been in the past. And views of China are quite negative. So, a full year ago, the big Pew study of public opinion in Taiwan found that only 35% of Taiwanese had a favorable view of China. And I tried to find data that's more recent and was unable to, but I'm pretty confident that that percentage would be even lower now, because in the past year, there have been a series of events or happenings that have, I think, almost undoubtedly further eroded favorability of China in Taiwan. And the major drivers of that trend, which is not new in the past year. I think Taiwanese have been increasingly skeptical about China for quite a while now, at least since the middle of Ma Ying-jeou's second term, so 2014 and beyond. We've been seeing deterioration in the favorability toward China among Taiwanese. But the past 2 years have just been a series of events that have cast the PRC in a more negative light for Taiwanese, including the Hong Kong crisis. However one might interpret what has been going on in Hong Kong for the last 2 years, the kind of standard thinking about the Hong Kong crisis in Taiwan is that this is an example of the bad faith that the Beijing leadership has toward those who are subject to its, if not direct control, then at least strong influence. So there's a lot of sympathy for the Hong Kong protesters in Taiwan. There's a lot of sympathy for Hong Kong people trying to leave Hong Kong and come to Taiwan, and so on. Now, those are the second one is a very complicated issue. That support is not unlimited, but it is striking how much conversation there has been about Hong Kong in Taiwan over the last 2 years compared to in previous years and decades. Another factor that's driving the more negative sentiment toward China in Taiwan is COVID. Even though Taiwan has handled COVID well, as I'm going to talk about that in a moment, it's understood in Taiwan that COVID originated on the Chinese mainland, and that the reason that they've handled COVID as well as they have is that they did not wait for a warning from the PRC government or permission from the WHO to stand up their response to COVID. Instead, it was Taiwan government's skepticism and suspicion and wariness toward the PRC that allowed Taiwan to get out ahead of the COVID epidemic. Also, the military pressure that has been escalating in recent months is noted by Taiwanese civilians. And there's just a general understanding among many people in Taiwan that under Xi Jinping, China is a less welcoming, less friendly, less open, and less economically advantageous place for Taiwanese than was true under previous PRC leaders. And all of this is made concrete in the presidential election result, of course, back in January, where a candidate who was widely unpopular 6 months before the election ended up winning a resounding victory along with her party in the legislature. So one of the questions that I think it's fair to ask is, how well is that victory holding up now? Tsai was elected in January. She's almost a year into the post-election. She was inaugurated for the second term in May. So how's that going? And I think it's going pretty well. For a president who battled low approval ratings through her first term, Tsai is actually doing astonishingly well in her second term. Just thinking about cross-strait relations, which was a weakness for Tsai in her first term, she was underwater throughout most of her first term on the question of, do you approve or disapprove of Tsai Ing-wen's management of cross-strait relations? Her approval finally surpassed disapproval in May of 2019, but the gap between those has continued to grow in a favorable direction And at the moment, it's about 2-to-1. So about twice as many people approve of her management of cross-strait relations as disapprove, which is really good for a Taiwanese president. She also gets very high ratings on the government's management of the COVID crisis. And so let me just say a word. I was asked to say a little something about what Taiwan's response to the COVID crisis was. I think the key elements that both made it so successful and also have made it so well received by the Taiwan population are transparency, decisiveness, and fairness. Transparency includes things like what Minister Tang was talking to NBR about earlier this year, the way that Taiwan has used surveillance and quarantine without major intrusions into people's privacy, but also things like the daily briefings that went on for months, where Taiwanese were told every day by their top health leadership exactly how many cases there were, where those cases came from, and so on. Decisiveness meaning Taiwan took swift action across a series of developments that could have been very destabilizing and that did in fact produce a certain amount of economic anxiety political anxiety and resistance. So I was in Taiwan in January, February, and March. And so I kind of watched the little waves or bubbles of fear inflate and then be deflated by the government's swift and decisive action on things like securing PPE. As the Director General just mentioned, how they retooled to do that, and many other things as well. And then fairness, the enforcement of the rules on quarantine and other aspects of the COVID management response were real and meaningful, but people also had what they needed in order to comply with the restrictions. So COVID is linked to cross-strait relations. Taiwanese were pretty down on China even before COVID. So Tsai's quick and decisive response to COVID was viewed through that lens. Basically, Beijing can't be trusted. And because our leader did not fall for this kind of Beijing WHO happy talk in the early days of the pandemic, Taiwan has been relatively well off. Some things were difficult at first in the COVID response. I think the biggest challenge was getting Taiwanese home from the mainland, especially from Wuhan. But Tsai was able to pull that off without allowing China or Beijing to overly dominate the process and to put Taiwan in a kind of supplicant position. So I have a few more thoughts about domestic politics, but my time is up and I definitely don't want to get on the wrong side of our hosts. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shelley. And I'm actually just going to ask you one really quick question before we go to Vinny. It's interesting, and I want to dig into this in the Q&A in a little bit about these long-term trends in public opinion and maybe some of the short-term impacts that you were describing of events in the last, say, 9 months. When is the next set of elections that will give us a sense of how the Taiwanese electorate is this popularity of the DPP still there? I know President Tsai herself doesn't go before the electorate for another, 4 years? But there'll be some elections coming up. When are those taking place that will give us our test of how well she's doing?
It should be in 2 years. 2 years. I think the local elections.
Local ones, okay.
And that was a big shock, right? In 2018, everybody thought that the KMT had made a big comeback because they were so successful in the 2018 local elections. So we can definitely get a surprise. That's a really good question.
Great. Thank you. Okay, and let me now go to Vinny Agarwal down in UC Berkeley and ask him to make his remarks. You're muted, Vinny.
Presentation, and thanks NBR for inviting me. So we've all heard for agreements a little bit. But before I do that, I thought I'd say a few things about Taiwan's trade policy, their general effort. I've already mentioned, it's already been mentioned already. by Consul General Chen, so Director General Chen. So let me talk about 3 points. The first one has to do with Taiwan's own efforts to diversify its trade policy away from China towards Southeast Asia and the United States. And if we look historically, of course, Taiwan first was very reluctant to do business with China, then it started doing business with China. It didn't pan out so well in many respects, and so then China, particularly in the context of the U.S. trade war with China, Taiwan decided to diversify its trade policy because of the excessive dependence. And we saw this effort towards South and Southeast Asia, which it's called this new southbound policy. And we did see some success in the sense that Taiwanese companies talked about reshoring to Taiwan and investing in those countries as part of this initiative. Yet ironically, with the COVID-19 pandemic, I was looking at some of the data, and actually Taiwanese exports to China increased by 10% from January to May 2020. So that does not exactly look like diversification, but I think that may be a temporary bump because of China's rapid recovery and other countries not doing it as well in the region. So I think that it may prove to be successful in the sense of this diversification effort, but of course, China is still a very important market for everyone concerned. The second aspect of Taiwan's efforts have to do with supply chains. And here, of course, Taiwan is a world leader in strategic industries like semiconductors, to some extent, information technologies. And we've seen this effort by President Tsai in her May 20 inaugural address to focus on 6 industries to increase its efforts to be successful economically, and these include biotech and medical technology, national defense strategic industries, and renewable energy technology. And here I think this may fit well with the U.S. efforts to redirect its supply chains in key industries away from China. So we already have the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company investing in the United States. I think that's important, spending $12 billion on new fab plant in Arizona. So those I think are trends that will help to tie American business more closely to Taiwan, even in the absence of an FTA. Now, let me focus on the main thing that I know about, which is bilateral free trade agreements, and think about the negotiation of free trade agreements. And the United States and Taiwan have talked about a bilateral free trade agreement at some point in time, some statements of the representatives, not necessarily USTR. And now we see more talk about that with the timing of the pandemic and the U.S.-China trade war, which in some sense has benefited Taiwan for the U.S. to think about not just dealing with China only and its unhappiness with China under the Trump administration. And as I think Loda pointed out, this has been going on for 2 decades nearly, talking about a U.S.-Taiwan FTA. And from Taiwan's perspective, and I'm sympathetic, but it's kind of like hurry up and wait. Right, so Taiwan's always hurry up and waiting. Oh, you just need to do one more thing, and so on. But let's look a little bit at the history of US FTAs. So basically, the United States pursued a multilateral approach all the way into the 1980s. It was always focused on the GATT and then later on the WTO. It did sign bilateral free trade agreements with Israel. People sometimes forget about that. In the early 80s, there actually was an agreement with Israel. And then, of course, there was the famous US-Canada free trade agreement that led eventually to NAFTA. But then nothing much happened, actually. Nothing much happened in terms of free trade agreement until after 9/11, when the Bush administration began to pursue free trade agreements, which with key partners in the region, which meant countries like Oman and Bahrain and Morocco, all that were quite economically insignificant in many respects, and yet they were seen to be strategically important. So FTA partner choice was based on some kind of grand strategy on the part of the Bush administration, or particular regions where the U.S. wanted to shore things up, maybe in Chile or in Australia, having to do with security reasons. So if we think about this purely from an economic standpoint, and we heard that from Loda, we heard that from Director General Chen, yes, it makes complete sense to have a free trade agreement with Taiwan, but that's an economic argument, not a political argument. And of course, FTAs are political creations, right? So they're not just economic creations. Otherwise, the U.S. would never have had an agreement with Morocco. I remember the calculation was that it costs more for USTR to fly back and forth to Morocco to negotiate with them than the actual calculation of economic gains. So clearly, FTAs are not just about these kind of economic factors. Second factor, which I think was important, which I think Taiwan should have done something about before, was pork and beef. That it was an impediment to talks. And remember, if we think going back the environment, just tying to my first point, was actually more benign for Taiwan in 2013 when it was able to negotiate agreements with New Zealand and with Singapore, right? And they were kind of FTAs, but no official FTA. And at that point, Taiwan had a kind of the ECFAR with China, so there was a kind of opening right there to do something. But of course, Taiwan was not able to go forward at that time. Then, of course, if we look under the Obama administration, the interest shifted to TPP. So there was not much interest in FTAs at all. It was the Trans-Pacific Partnership on the one hand, and it was, of course, the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with the EU, which was the effort that they were pursuing. And the fourth and most important point that I think we really should talk about, which is the gorilla in the room, as they say, is China, right? So, of course, talking about economic benefits, talking about support for Taiwan and all of this is great, but it really doesn't tell us much about, and we did hear a little bit, what would China do? I think that's really what we need to think about when we think about an FTA. And I'm going to mention a point here that I think is important. Would it really be beneficial for Taiwan if China starts retaliating and getting more aggressive if they negotiate an FTA? And I'm going to say FTAs are not the be-all and the end-all. I'll mention that in the first point. So first, with respect to the Biden administration, I was able to serve a little bit on the trade committee, not the transition committee, but the trade committee, looking at some of these issues for the Biden administration when he was a candidate. And I was, I can say this, I was pushing, let's talk about TPP, let's talk about all this. And I won't mention other people but by name, but basically they were saying, no, we're not going to talk about FTAs. We're not going to talk about TPP. We're not interested in talking about TTIP. We want to really focus on Build Back America, green technology, and so on. So if there is to be an FTA with Taiwan, it's not going to happen for at least 2 or 3 years. I just don't see how that's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but it does not seem to me the Biden administration is really committed to moving forward with trade policy. One obstacle is gone. That is the pork and beef issue is gone. So that's a good thing. So, protectionist interests in the United States in agriculture cannot say we don't like Taiwan because we can't sell beef and pork. So that at least that's gone, which is a good thing. Now, what about RCEP, which Loda also mentioned, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership? Well, Taiwan is not a member of that, and Taiwan did make an effort to join a TPP for many years and tried to get Japanese interests in Australia, and they were all reluctant. And now Taiwan is trying to join CPTPP. Of all the things, I think if the U.S. goes back into CPTPP, I think it's more likely that the U.S. might support Taiwan in CPTPP rather than necessarily sign a bilateral free trade agreement, since the United States would be pursuing more of a minilateral strategy of trade. So for the near future, I think the U.S. will be domestically focused on this green build back of the economy, not so much on trade agreements, which I might note provides an opening for Taiwanese firms who are interested in green. Taiwan is, of course, quite interested in green technology and green industries, to try to participate in that and be involved with the United States. So this might be kind of an alternative for this immediate, before we get to that prospect of an FTA down the line. Now, what about the fourth point, the U.S.-China relationship? Well, as we know, that remains very delicate. There's a big debate. What is Biden going to do with respect to China? We saw that the Trump administration had protectionist policies against the Chinese, and the Chinese then retaliated against the United States. We had the January agreement to try to increase sales of American goods to China. Now, did that actually help Taiwan, right? It helped Taiwan. It was probably explains why 50 senators, 42 Republicans, and 8 Democrats in October called on Ambassador Lighthizer to open negotiations on an FTA with Taiwan. Now, is that likely to happen under the new administration? I would have to say no. So one might say, oh, great, U.S.-China tension is good for Taiwan. But this is a very delicate game, because too much U.S.-China tension is also not good for Taiwan more generally, right? So while I think an FTA is very important to Taiwan, it would be beneficial to Taiwan, I think one should not put all their eggs in this particular basket when company ties and ties between American companies and Taiwan Taiwanese companies might prove just as effective for Taiwan in boosting its economy and dealing with the fact that it's being cut out of RCEP and has not a member of TPP. So this ongoing economic exchange between the United States and Taiwan may well suit it better than obsessing with trying to negotiate a Taiwan-US FTA. So thanks, and I'll look forward to your questions.
Thanks so much, Vinny. I'm going to ask a couple of questions to begin with. And the first, I think, primarily focused at Lotte first and then Vinny. And that's to sort of give us a little bit more on how you two anticipate the US approach toward trade potentially evolving as we move into a Biden administration. And it's a two-part question. Vinny's hinted at this. On the one hand, there's a sense that the Biden team might be very focused internally. They'll still have the COVID pandemic to deal with. There's a lot of talk about investments in renewable technologies and investments in infrastructure within the United States. And some of the conversations we've had with counterparts have suggested that there maybe is an inward-looking focus that will continue in a Biden administration. So my first part question for you two is, how much do you think the Biden team, once it gets established and consolidates and determines its policy priorities, will focus on trade versus focus on domestic economic renewal? And then secondly, as we look at the trade question, and again, Vinny's given us an opening here, to what extent will the Biden team, in your opinion, focus on bilateral FTAs, which was definitely the preference of the Trump team, versus a return to more of a multilateral approach, looking at things like CPTPP? So, and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about that, because my second broad question is for all three of you. The economic, the political logic really does drive us towards a deeper U.S. Taiwan relationship. It strengthens supply chains, especially in some of the high-tech and 5G and telecom sectors that are critically important, and that are very much the focus of China's Made in 2025 policy. And so there's a lot that's driving Taiwan and the United States together there. My question for all three of you on this second point is, even if that push is successful, and we start to see these diversified supply chains that are concentrated more in democratic, open free market economies, is Taiwan really going to be able to reduce its dependence on China as a manufacturing base and really be able to play a part in those supply chains that aren't as dependent on the China market as they have been up until now? So a lot of questions there. We'll start with Lotte and then Vinny. Focus initially on the US trade approach, please. Lotte, you're muted.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the Vinny's talk there. I think it's important to say, it's very difficult to say, I think, what's going to happen when the Biden administration takes over. They're definitely, like you said, are going to be focused primarily on inward looking, on the pandemic, on energy, and so on. While trade will be important, I don't think that this, they've already said that they're not going to be looking at new trade deals at the beginning of his administration. And so we're going to have to take a little bit of a longer view, I think, on whether Taiwan and the US can sign an FTA or not. I do think that they will be more focused on multilateral deals than bilateral deals, similar to during the President Obama's term, more so than the current administration. I do think that Taiwan isn't particular, they're focused on the VTA, but I don't think it's exclusively or obsessively focused on the VTA. They're looking at other ways of moving forward with trade, like this dialogue at the end of the week, like the TIPA talks. And so it's a good goal to have. And it might just take a long time for it to actually play out, even though it's been, we've been talking about it for years. But I do think that during the Biden administration, we're going to see some difference in how Taiwan is handled, how trade is handled. But it's a little too early, I think, to tell exactly what's going to happen. It's going to depend on who they put in at USTR. It's going to be a big determinant of what happens.
Before we go to Vinny, let me just put you on the spot, Lotte. What does your gut tell you? Who are the leading candidates for that position at U.S. Taiwan?
Oh yeah, there's so many. There's too many candidates to say. I mean, I think there's some in Congress who might be potential to go in. Yeah, I'm not comfortable to say that there's a lot of people who have, who maybe have their eye on that spot, that I'm not really going to say what I think is going to happen.
Question. More broadly, though, are you expecting to see some kind of rebalance in the relationship between state and USTR in terms of seeing how these trade negotiations between the U.S. and Taiwan might play out?
Well, I do think that USTR has always been very focused. Trade issues have always been very focused in USTR. So I'm not sure that there might be some rebalancing. And the State Department has really sort of put their foot forward and trying to look at some of the economic relationships around the world. But USTR, I think, is going to still maintain the lead on trade issues during the Biden administration.
Thank you. Okay, Vinny, how about you?
I would agree that for the Biden, which is a last I don't but on the bonus, but I hello.
Vinny, it's not so much a volume issue as your connection's breaking up. So I do want to hear what you're going to say about USTR, but maybe pause for just a second. Let's go to Shelley and then back to Lotta about the dependence of the Taiwanese economy and the supply chains on the China market, and see whether we can fix this connection issue and then come back to you. Shelley, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Yeah, it's very hard to imagine Taiwanese companies completely disentangling themselves from the production platform that they have created in the PRC. There are industries that just the cost of moving is astronomical. That doesn't mean, though, that they will necessarily continue to, that everyone will necessarily continue to expand within the PRC. So one thing that we've seen in the last 10 years or so is companies, they still are running their factories in China, but they're also opening new facilities elsewhere. And it depends on what industry you're in. If it's traditional industry, you're probably opening the new factory in someplace like Vietnam or Sri Lanka or Madagascar. But if you are high tech, you may be opening the new factory in Taiwan, right? There's been a lot of returning investment back to Taiwan. So basically, I think what happened is that two things happened more or less on approximately the same time frame. One was the cost of production in mainland China increased a lot. And the other was the customers that Taiwanese companies are manufacturing for began to ask them to diversify, sometimes for business reasons, other times for political reasons. Then you sort of get that turbocharged with the trade war. So Taiwanese companies are increasingly now investing in automation and strategies that will allow them to relocate outside of the PRC, not just for political reasons, but also for the economic reasons related to the cost of production in mainland China, and the clear signals from the PRC government that they are no longer wanted in China in the way they once were. You know, at one time, Taiwanese investors got really great terms and they were heavily courted. Then in 2015, the Made in China 2025 guidelines came out, and I think the message was really clear that the clock is ticking on foreign investors, especially in high value sectors, and we are trying to find a way to get rid of you. And so a lot of the Taiwanese companies took that to mean they needed to find an escape route, a new place to be. And for a lot of them, it turns out that the new place to be is actually Taiwan.
Lotta, anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I will just associate myself with what Shelley said. That's right on the money, I think, for what's happening. I think Taiwan companies are not gonna, shut down their production in the PRC right now, but they're not going to be putting more money into it, and they're going to be looking at other places to make investments, if that's at home for high tech stuff, or for Vietnam and Indonesia and Thailand for maybe lower tech stuff. But they are going to be moving. It's potential that we're seeing this sort of split in the supply chain and technology in particular, where we're going to get what they've been calling the red supply chain versus the US based supply chain. So it would be a two-part. So one would be China and countries that are associated with the PRC, and then one would be the US side and democracies and Taiwan on the other side. So that's something that we're keeping an eye on.
That's interesting. That concept has come up certainly in a number of the briefings that we've been part of this year. Let's make that specific. We have a number of questions coming in the chat box here that are sort of asking about an example of that, and that's the relationship between TSMC and Huawei, and then I think more broadly, the role that I guess the semiconductor industry is playing in China's economic growth plans and its ability to pursue the goals it has in quantum computing and AI and some of the other priorities in Made in China 2025, which at the moment are very dependent on those high-level chips that are being manufactured in Taiwan. So for any of the three of you, and we'll start with Shelley and then Lotta. It looks like, Vinny, we're trying to figure out the connection here. Some thoughts on that relationship between TSMC and Huawei, and then the broader sort of 5G telecom semiconductor industry.
So it's really not fair to make me answer because I asked the question.
Other people have too, though, so it's okay. You're free to go.
No, that's okay. I think I'm just really fascinated by this particular dimension, because it seems to me that this is where all of the things that are easy for us to say run into a speed bump. So the U.S. wants to support Taiwan's economy. TSMC is a great company. It's multiple tech generations ahead of anyone else. We want that company to thrive. We want that company to maintain its technological lead and its independence, because it limits what the PRC can do on its own if it is dependent upon customers in the PRC. If they are sort of forced to integrate at least something of the non-red supply chain, that ought to be a good thing. At the same time, though, we've seen the Trump administration's efforts to rein in or even bring down Huawei. TSMC's caught in the middle, and it turns out that precisely because Taiwan has such robust economic relations with the PRC, despite the political problems, when the U.S. begins to move towards something like decoupling, as it's called, from the Chinese economy, TSMC is not going to be the only company, the only Taiwanese entity that's going to be caught in the middle. And I don't think we've really fully grappled with what that's like, and what the costs sometimes of policies that on the whole make sense might actually be for individual companies. So that was why I asked the question.
Great, thank you. I think we've got Vinny back in a good connection here. So Vinny, do you want to pick up anything on this specific idea on the TSMC, Huawei, and chip sector?
Well, actually, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. Actually, I want to go back to this question of whether Taiwan would be reliant on China for supply chains, if I may. And I think the point there is that I think a lot of countries are trying to diversify away from China for their supply chains, and they're going to Vietnam, they're going to India, they're going to Cambodia. So I think Taiwan is likely to follow a similar strategy. I don't think it's just going to be about relying on China for all of its production. So I think that's a potential strategy for Taiwanese companies to pursue. And of course, I think with Build Back and the Biden administration, investing in the United States is obviously going to be a good strategy as well.
Thank you. Lotte, how about you?
Yeah, can I just jump on the TSMC Huawei issue? So TSMC was indeed asked to or ordered not to be selling to Huawei, and there was a lot of talk in Taiwan at the time on what impact that would have on the TSMC revenues and things like that. And actually, what happened in the I think it was early October. They talked about their shareholders meeting, and they actually managed to really make up for the issues that they were having with being able to supply Huawei by adding additional customers from the United States and from around the world. So really, TSMC, even though everybody was really worried about what would happen, they managed to make up what they had lost. And so there is some potential there and Huawei is really suffering right now. But I think there's definitely some leeway there for Taiwan and for the U.S. to kind of look at moving away from the revenues coming out of the PRC and supply coming out of the PRC as well.
Great. I'm gonna actually, Daniel, could we come back to you for a second here? From a Taiwanese government's perspective, tell us a little bit more about how Taipei is looking at this question. I mean, we've heard the three experts here describe some of the broader ramifications around concerns over Chinese control or dominance in the supply chains and some really critical technologies. To what extent is Taiwan looking at those questions and considering changes to its investment controls or its security considerations, as it's thinking, in the context of trying to deepen its relationship and its trade relationship with the United States? How much is this playing into the deliberations that are taking place in Taipei?
I think this question is that if you look upon, all the development before that, we found out those over-reliance on China market can be a national security threat to Taiwan. So that's why we try really, really hard to prevent this from happening. And also for private sector, since Taiwan is a democracy, we cannot kind of ask or dictate the companies to, you cannot invest over there, you cannot invest over here. So just like Shirley just mentioned, that it must be some other reasons rather than political reasons. The company, they have their calculations. So that's why they move to other area instead of keep on staying in China. But as regard to your question, that we do see this as a threat to our national security. So we don't want our supply chain or kind of a critical infrastructure to be controlled by the other side, which is kind of hostile and never denounced the use of force against Taiwan.
Thank you. I'd like to ask what might be the final question. We'll see how long this takes to address. and to broaden the lens to a global level. So I think it was Lotte just now, Vinny mentioning TTIP, and I think Lotte, it was you who sort of put on the table this idea of almost a bifurcation in the global markets, where there's a set of trusted suppliers meeting certain standards that would include the advanced democracies of Asia and the United States on the one hand, and on the other, countries that are sort of following Chinese standards and part of a sort of almost a different market. I'd like you, all three of you, all four of you actually, to sort of address the question of what's the potential role of Europe then, and EU ties with Taiwan, as we imagine futures where this kind of trusted democratic supply and marketplace is working. Both the EU and specifically, and this is a personal interest for the UK right now, which is potentially going to be desperate for a free trade agreement with pretty much anybody early next year, depending on how it deals with the departure from the EU with Brexit. And Vinny, let's start with you.
Okay, let me see. Yes, well, I think that's a complicated idea. I think I've written a little bit about this in the sense if we move to a bipolar trading order in which we really have a split with the U.S. and TPP countries, excluding China, and the U.S. pursuing TTIP with the EU, that would be a kind of a very different model. In fact, that was the Obama administration strategy at one point in some ways to contain China. People did not really understand that or see it that way, but in fact, that was what the Obama administration was trying to do, which is to engage in standard setting and product setting, which are quite different than the products and standards that China has. And if the United States would have pursued that, and in fact, Obama had said that very clearly, we want to be the ones to set standards for the world, then the U.S. would have been able to do that. I just think that under the Biden administration, given the very much focus on the domestic market and building back, which makes some sense because in some sense, the United States has been weakened compared to China, both after the 2008 financial crisis, and then we went into the COVID business, and whereas China has not suffered as much from either the financial crisis or suffered as much from the COVID crisis because of its handling of it. So I think there will be kind of build up American strength before the United States and us to figure out where should we be going for our relations with other countries. If China is really becoming much more hostile, then we really will enter a kind of bipolar world in which you have a U.S. Soviet style where there was not almost any trade between the U.S. and Soviet Union. And at one point, the Trump administration clearly was moving in that direction of a bipolar trading world as it tried to pull American firms to get them to leave China. So I think that's yet to be seen, and it may not be a great development for Taiwan if China is very aggressive towards Taiwan in the short term, and President Xi has been much more aggressive than previous Chinese leaders.
Thank you. How about Lotte? Do you want to take on that question?
Well, I'm not sure that I have that much to add to that. Yes, it's the EU is going to be an important partner for Taiwan as well. It's something that they've been moving towards in the last couple of years. Is continuing to build their relationship with the EU and with Europe in general. But as far as this issue of a bipolar world, yes, the EU would be on the US side, obviously, or the Europe would be on the US side. I'm not sure that that's where we're going to be going now, but that's yeah, I'm not sure that I really have any good things to add. I thought that what Vinny said was quite good.
All right, Shelley, anything from your side here?
Yeah, I really don't have anything at all to add, except to say that the idea of two separate or parallel supply chains for high-tech goods does not sound good to me. It sounds like a very dystopian kind of economic outcome. It certainly would ensure that the PRC in particular would find a way to acquire the technology to match, and eventually they would certainly try to outpace the technologies available on the, let's call it the blue supply chain. If there's a red supply chain and a blue supply chain, then instead of cooperating with countries that are part of the red team or that lean in a pinkish direction, instead of selling them things and buying things from them and integrating ourselves together in meaningful ways so that we have shared interests in the future. If we were to have, the Chinese chips that work in the Chinese machines and then the TSMC chips that work in the blue supply chain machines, that just sounds like a really bad idea to me. And it's one of the reasons why I question a policy that forces the PRC to steal from TSMC, to poach employees from TSMC, to beggar huge parts of the Chinese economy, right? Like wages and the standard of living of low income people in China, so that a handful of TSMC or other Taiwanese engineers can be bought with, just incredible salaries and benefits and all the stuff. This just doesn't seem like a healthy form of economic activity to me. And you guys are the economists and I'm the political scientist, so maybe I'm seeing it wrong. But it feels like if this is a direction that we are going, we should pause and think about whether this is a good direction.
Thank you. Let me do this. Before we come to Daniel, I want to give Daniel the last word here, but I'm going to rewind in reverse order. So Shelley first, then Lotte, then Vinny. And let's narrow the focus back down to the U.S. Taiwan economic relationship. As you're looking out, say, over the next 6 to 9 months, what's the one thing that you're going to look for as these negotiations unfold, or as you see the bilateral relationship develop, or developments on the ground in Taiwan? What's the one thing that you're going to pay attention to that would give us an indication that we're on track to see a deepening of the economic relationship between the two sides?
The quick answer to that is we're going to see more and more voices, issued by the U.S. government. We, especially for the U.S. new government. I think just like Lotte and Shirley just mentioned that we have 161 congressmen, issue their joint letter to USTI, and plus this year we have 50 senators asking Ambassador Lighthizer to help us. So I think the next one is we're going to see what's going on with the dialogue, and also we hope that we can have some positive voice from the USTR. I think that's the thing that I will keep on paying attention to.
Shelley.
I think the thing that I will be looking out for most is some kind of relaxation in the tensions between the US and the PRC, because I believe there is at least a possibility that part of the reason for the PRC's assertiveness and even appearance of hostility toward Taiwan is that's partially a reflection of their concern about the unpredictability of US policy and the possibility of an abrupt and severe downturn in US-China relations. I mean, it's already pretty bad. It's gotten a lot worse in a very short time, right? The Trump administration was kind of back and forth about China until COVID, and now it has been a one-dimensional downward trend. I think this has the Chinese very concerned. I think the lack of a smooth transition in the US presidential election is also very concerning. It's a very unpredictable and dangerous moment. And if we can't bring some of that tension down, Taiwan is going to be under enormous stress.
Thank you. Lotte, how about you?
I think I'm going to be looking at what is happening on U.S. Taiwan relations sort of continue? Are we going to continue to see some of the same talks, the same close integration on on economics things? Are we going to see more arms sales? Are we going to see, where is the new administration going to go when it comes to bilateral relations with Taiwan? Are we going to continue to see more people going out to Taiwan, high-level government officials coming to the U.S.? Is that going to continue? And I think that will give us a really good idea of where we're going to be over the next 4 years.
Thank you. And then Vinny.
Yes, I think the thing to watch is what happens to the U.S.-China trade agreement. I think the Trump administration was very aggressive towards China, but from what I see among the advisors to the Biden administration, that is not going to go away in terms of an aggressive policy towards China. I think there'll be much more coherence, and hopefully there'll be much more coherence than there was under Trump. I think the U.S. will bring in the EU and try to coordinate with them better, but it may be more narrowly focused on Chinese IP and IP theft issues that the United States has been very concerned about. But there is this U.S.-China deal, and until there's some clarity on where that's going to go, I think, unfortunately, Taiwan will be a little bit on the back burner for the Biden administration.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, time is up. This has been a robust, rich discussion. Thank you, Vinny Agarwal, Lotta Danielson, Shelley Rigger, for your expert remarks. Director General Chen, thank you for your keynote address at the beginning and your participation in the debate. It's a pleasure to have you all on this session. I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as we have. This has been recorded. It will be available on the NBR website for people to view in the future. But I just want to finish off today by thanking you all for your participation. Thank you for all of you who took the time to watch us today.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.